Hi and welcome to Omni Edition Garden City. I'm Dan York, and with me is City Manager Robert Muery and also the Chief of Police for the City of Garden City. Welcome back to our program.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Just want to talk about really just some of the things that are going on in the community. It's been a while since we've had the City Manager here, and we wanted to get some updates. Obviously, the budget is the biggest thing that occupies your time this time of year, I assume.
It absolutely is. It kicks off probably in earnest around December of the previous year. We start working on things with the department heads, start holding internal meetings and compiling figures, also compiling projections from various sources on what the revenues of the city are expected to be. And then it all comes together through some council workshops held in public, council meetings, and then a final presentation to council and their consideration and approval.
Now, the city's budget year, as is, I guess, every city in Michigan, begins on July 1st, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and whereas the state's budget year is a different time of the calendar.
It's yes, it's October, I believe, that causes some confusion.
And even the school district is on a third time schedule, as far as I understand, that again I think it causes them more trouble than it causes us, because they have funding issues that occur because of the state's budget not corresponding with theirs.
Yeah, our fiscal year is pretty standard among municipalities, but there are some who are different, but this presents no problems to us. It suits us well.
Okay. And as we go through the process, departments make their presentations. We have to have projections, though, obviously, that come from Allison Bettis and her folks as to what we assume we're going to have as far as cash for the upcoming year.
Right. We have to, there are varying sources of revenue with including the state revenue that they return to us, that they've slashed over the years, but it's coming back in small increments. There's the property taxes, a big part of our budget, the millage that's out there, and we have to see how all of those things are going to come together, and how much money will be relied on or can be relied on as revenues. Some things that are sort of on the if come, we don't really take into account when we're putting together a budget. We don't want to spend money we are not certain we are going to receive.
Absolutely. And one of the problems is, even as the economy comes back, our home values drop so drastically in the community. As those home values begin to come back because of state legislation, the revenues back to the city will not come back anywhere near as quickly as they decline.
No, it will be a long and slow recovery for the taxing entity. I think we will see homes recover a lot more quickly, but we're limited on how much we can recover tax-wise each year as the real estate market improves. So that's slow, that's baby steps.
Right.
And that's why you'll actually see a number of the budgets are stagnant. There are a few changes here and there. Obviously the cost of some goods goes up. We have to adjust for that. Personnel costs can increase, not necessarily because of raises, but because of some of the other benefits that employees are given and the cost associated with that. So there can be minor increases and then some changes, but you'll see if you look back over the last couple of years, and certainly going forward for the next few years, it's going to be stagnant, because we don't want to spend money until we're certain that we have it.
Sure, absolutely. But at least we've been able to slow the tide of cuts.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Absolutely. We got out in front of this. We're very fortunate. There are other communities around us who are not as fortunate. They're fighting some battles now, but we got out in front of it. Yes, there was some bleeding. We lost some people, some good people. But we're slowly rebuilding, and we're rebuilding reasonably. Do I think we'll ever be back to where we were pre-housing crunch? No, I do not think we'll ever be back there. I think we've learned how to do things a little leaner.
The new reality, I guess they might call it.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Now, even though part of the conversation about the budget occurs at regular city council meetings, the majority of it, the bulk of it, happens at these budget workshops, correct?
That's correct. There's more of an opportunity for an interchange, a question and answer from council to department heads, so department heads can explain, why they're doing something, why the cost of pencils went up. And the public is also able to provide their input through the public comments at the end of this. Those workshops are, if anybody's ever attended one, it's an entirely different seating plan there, so that we're directly across from council, can answer their questions, provide them with documents, and it really is a true workshop. It's a give and take, and the council's not expected to know every component of every department out here. That's what we have department heads for.
Sure, absolutely.
So it can be productive. Our most recent workshop was just on council goals, and the purpose of that was to hear council's stated goals to guide the department heads as they now prepare a budget. If a department head is heading off in a direction that council doesn't really support by their stated goals, then the department head might want to go in a different direction. And a prime example of this, although nobody ever really beat me up on it, I just felt there wasn't a lot of support, was my dog park that I wanted in the city.
Okay.
And I just sensed there wasn't going to be the financial support for that
Sure.
dog park, so just had to quietly walk away from that.
But there's an idea of just floating an idea and see what happens, and see take the temperature, if you will, of the council and the city.
Yes, and we do that, and it's a small group of citizens that come to these workshops, which is unfortunate, because we really would like to hear from more citizens. I know it can be dull, boring sometimes, but that input is valuable, and if you can't come to a meeting, at least phone the city manager or one of your council members or the mayor and voice your opinion.
Sure. And of course, you can find email addresses for all of the city council members on the city's website, www.gardencitymi.org. And you talked about the turnout for some of these budget workshops. We do know that we have one coming up at the end of March, right?
Yes, I believe March 28th is the next one. It'll be held at the police department. We do that in part because that room is more configured for that informal face-to-face seating.
A little more intimate, if you will.
Thank you. Probably what I meant. And more of a workshop atmosphere. So that's why those are moved over. I know the question has often been asked, why do we do those at the police department without televising? It's primarily for this more intimate workshop setting that we can talk face-to-face.
Okay. And this will go on throughout March, throughout April, and maybe throughout May.
And until we have several workshops tentatively scheduled,
Right.
until we reach a point where the parties both seem to be satisfied with the product,
Sure.
we'll continue having workshops.
But it does make it, I don't want to say easier, but the process may be a little more simplified, because the dollars we're talking about aren't much more than the dollars we talked about last year.
That's correct. That's yes. It's one of the really blessings, I guess, since I've been city manager, is that we're primarily dealing with the same little pot of money and trying to maintain the same quality services, and that's what we have to work to do.
Okay. One of the things that's a part of this process is the 5-year capital improvement plan. One of the places the city maybe has struggled over the last couple of years is with capital improvements, because we haven't had the money for these big ticket items.
That's true, and we, because as things were being cranked down, these capital improvement things, as you mentioned, are generally speaking big ticket items. And when things got tight, there were just some things we had to turn our back on for a period of time. But we can't continue to ignore some of the infrastructure things.
Sure.
Council recognizes that. Council last year during the budget process wanted the parking lot at Garden City Park taken care of. And it's been resurfaced. Unfortunately, the weather got to us while we were in mid-process. It'll be completed in the spring of this year. And that's a major item. So all of the department heads get together and project the various capital needs under their authority. This is all compiled onto a list and presented to council. Now to look at it, it's everything totaled up, it's a high price tag. But as long as I've been involved in this process, it's never the intent that everything that's put on that list needs to be done this year.
Right.
We then go back among department heads and start paring things down. And that will get us to the ultimate presentation to City Council.
Sure.
There's also a public hearing that is held on the capital improvement plan. So it's a long process, but very necessary.
And one of the purposes of the capital improvement plan is to identify these needs and at least expose these needs and begin a dialogue about these needs, even if it's something we simply can't afford.
When it comes to long-term planning, you really need to keep an eye on those long-term goals. For instance, the DPS building is an old building. It's in disrepair. It needs attention. The total makeover of that building's probably, and I'm just guessing here, probably around $500,000. So we need to be mindful of that, because at some point that's going to happen. We ignore it, it's going to happen at some point. So we need to be mindful. We need to either begin doing it in steps, which is what we're doing now. We're going to do the roof first. Or we need to know this much in fund balance should be available in 3 years or 5 years, because we're predicting the end of life to this particular major project.
Sure. Okay. Well, and then this building would be a great example of that too, whereas when things got tight, this was one of the buildings that really, I don't want to say got ignored, but got pushed to the end of the line. And here's a building too that recently did get a new roof, is eventually going to need a new parking lot. Again, you talk about kicking the can down the road. You can only do that for so long, and also needs major infrastructure work of this building.
Yes, and I am not a big fan of the kick the can down the road management philosophy. As anybody who watches council meetings knows, a problem that was over 20 years old suddenly became my problem to deal with. This current city council's problem, our current DPS's problem to deal with, because somebody kicked the can down the road. And I find that to be an irritating form of management.
Sure.
And I'm all for let's plan. That's what we've been trying to do here. You know, we just don't have our nose down. Let's get through the next 12 or 18 months. We're looking down the road. Everything we talk about, is it sustainable? Will it be able to be carried on under the circumstances, or even if the circumstances were to worsen to some degree?
Sure.
So we're very mindful of that now. That's certainly one of the good things that came out of the real estate crash, the great economic crisis, was we're very mindful of being prepared and being alert to something like that happening again.
Okay. Talking about infrastructure, one of the proposals that has been brought to council and is being explored is a repaving, or in this case, the first time paving of a stretch of Hubbard, which would be south of Maplewood and running to the area where the industrial park begins. That is an old asphalt blacktop road that's been there forever and is in dire need of repair.
It is in rough shape. It originally, going back several years, was going to be part of the Maplewood project. The Maplewood project was killed, so this portion of Hubbard was also killed. And now we're going back to revisit it because the road's in such bad shape. Right now, no decisions have been made. We're waiting to get some engineering results back to talk about the structure of that road and how it will impact the residents in the area. But Hubbard, as anybody who drives around Garden City knows, Hubbard is one of many bad roads in the city.
Right.
We're doing everything we can. We're hoping for some help, additional help from state and federal funding because we're doing about a mile a year. That's not going to work as a
that's a 99-year cycle. That could get you in trouble.
Yeah. So we certainly want to get better at this. I'm not saying that we're bad at what we do. I'm saying that the funding's not there. We can only afford to do so much.
Sure.
And at some point, I'm hoping that Lansing and Washington, D.C. realize that little communities like ours need some help, or we're going to be back to wagon train ruts. And
Well, folks that aren't lifers like you and I, back in the 90s, we probably did 40 miles of roads during that decade, and it was quite a transformation from asphalt roads, a lot of ditches, and got a lot of the streets paved in the community during the 90s, and it caused a little bit of trouble for some people, but ultimately it was a good thing to get that work done. But the money was available then, the federal money was there, the state money was there, and obviously our coffers were a little deeper.
And what I would like to have seen then is when they did this project, and I'm not being critical of past administrations, I understand how they're in a time and a place where it seems money is good. It seems that outside funding is good, so it seems there are no worries. But what I would have liked to have seen was somebody say, this road's got about a 20-year life on it. So let's start once a year putting in 1/20th of what it's going to take to replace this road. We'll set it aside somewhere. And that way, when we get to 20 years, there's no big surprise. Hey, there's the money we planned for this.
Right.
That would have been my preference.
Sure. Well, but here we are, right?
Here we are.
Speaking of roads, at a recent city council meeting, the council approved the purchase of, I don't know how many police cars, but we're taking a little different tact in our replacement of our police cars and going with SUVs now, correct?
Yes, this has been trending in other police departments. Because it costs more than the average four-door police car that we've traditionally driven, we've kind of stayed away from it. But we recognize that, our officers, it's funny because I was looking back to when I joined the police department in 1974, and the size of average officers then and the size of officers now, people are taller, people are bigger. And I'm not just talking about bellies. I'm talking about headroom, leg room. So we watched other police departments, and those types of vehicles seem to be working out well for them. Plus, remember that we're carrying so much gear now. In 1976, when I was first put on the road, here's your ticket book, here's your flashlight, your ink pen. Make sure you've got, at that time, a dime in your pocket to call the station if you need help. And get on out there. Well, things have changed. I mean, this is a rolling computer lab, along with the various equipment that the officer needs to carry in his trunk. And the SUV is more suitable to that.
And the four-wheel drive component actually becomes pretty important because standard, they're called interceptors, is that what the
Yes.
Standard interceptors are usually rear-wheel drive and a lot of power in the back and a lot of this going on in the snow. They're not exactly the best equipped during a snow event to get from point A to point B.
No, they're not. And that was one of the things, actually a change that were forced to make. We originally were going to get a two-wheel drive vehicle because it cost less, a little over $1,000 less. Apparently somebody at Ford had the wisdom to realize this two-wheel drive police utility vehicle is not a good thing for police work because they stopped making it.
Okay.
And so we will be going to the all-wheel drive vehicle.
All right. And how many are we getting?
3 this year.
And again, this is a good example of doing this in yearly increments, of projecting what you're going to need and trying to replace enough to replace a couple a year or 3 a year, so you're never in dire need.
Right, and this is actually part of, our police cars are part of that capital improvement plan that we discussed. We include those in there. And there have been several years where because the budget was tight, those police cars got whacked out of the budget. We went several years without new cars, which becomes expensive on the other end. The repairs just become, it's outrageous.
Sure. One of the projects that's going to happen this summer, we assume, is some streetlight changes on Ford Road. The DDA has one project while the city is working on another project, but these are all in conjunction with Detroit Edison.
Yes, that's correct. The city itself is doing a part of Ford Road, just upgrading to LED lighting. This is part of our ongoing, we're now in year 3 of our LED program. We had to ratchet it back a little this year because there just wasn't enough money there, and it would have been an increase to the homeowners in that assessment they're paying for streetlights, and we didn't want to do that. What we did do is find a less expensive alternative project, which was Ford Road. We're doing that in conjunction with the DDA, who is going to extend their special lighting to Henry Ruff. It currently stops at Brant going westbound, and then to Harrison. It currently stops at Garden going eastbound. So we should see some new lighting in there, and DTE is helping out with expenses and has entered into an agreement with the DDA to allow them to spread it out over 3 years. So it'll look good.
Yeah, so what will happen is in the what they call gateway areas of the DDA, all of that wiring that is now above ground will be buried. That will all become below ground wiring, and it'll be more of an ornamental light. And then on the city's end, from Harrison to Inkster and Henry Ruff to Merriman, we're going to stick with the wood poles, but we're also going to get them out of series. That's probably the biggest advantage, correct, is that now when a car takes out one pole, half a mile of lights are gone.
Yes, that's one of the most frustrating things is, because I worked the street for a long time. One pole gets taken out, and you're plunged into darkness out there. So they are going to change that, and then we'll get the better lighting, and it's exciting. It's a good change.
Very good. And then last thing, we have some major projects that have kind of stumbled, and as far as businesses and developments. We had the Knights of Columbus property that was torn down. We thought a development might be going there. That one has slowed down. The folks from Suburban Fiat Chrysler have bought the old Stu Evans Metropolitan Lincoln Mercury property. We don't know anything about that yet, right? That's on hold?
They haven't announced any plans to us yet.
Okay. And then one of the ones that's obviously pretty visible to people is the corner of Ford and Middlebelt, McDonald's, where they actually own that property, correct, that's now vacant there?
Yes.
And brought a plan to the city about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, and there was some give and take there, and then that kind of got pushed to the back burner.
It did, not by us. It appears by McDonald's. There was some give and take, and we thought we had arrived at something that was acceptable to everybody, but then suddenly McDonald's went radio silent on us. We've been pursuing them. There's been a change in project managers. We finally spoke to the actual owner of McDonald's just yesterday. And the owner tells us he's still very interested in this. Yes, some of the changes the city had made or had suggested had pushed the price tag up a little, and he was concerned about that pricing, but still interested in talking, still wants to move forward. So we're excited. It's not a dead deal.
Okay, very good, because that's such a high-profile corner, and even though it hasn't gotten bad yet, it's still not a great thing to have nothing there.
No, we have, once a month I have an economic development task force meeting. It's just some stakeholders from within the city. We all sit down at a table and we talk about a variety of things. And of course, as you can imagine, McDonald's is on the agenda every meeting, and we came up with some plans at the next meeting. If McDonald's was going to continue to ignore us, I don't think we'll have to institute those plans, but I liked them. But that's, I just, that's a high visibility corner.
Right.
And I don't like the way it looks, and I don't understand why it's not being developed.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us, and we know you will have a busy time over the next several months with the budget and everything else going on in the community.
Are you sure you didn't want to talk about body cams or anything like that?
Well, we could talk about. Well, those were notes for later, but from
later what? I'm not coming back to talk to you.
From the police angle, let's talk to the chief of police then for a second, since we just pushed the city manager off the bridge.
Do we need to do a little reset here?
Let's talk about the body cameras. We got those in the fall, correct?
Yes.
And how has that worked out?
It's worked out quite well. We've had some accusations made against officers that when the accuser was informed he was wearing a body cam and it was on, and let's go take a look at that, the accuser has gone away. It's been valuable in monitoring issues with police officers to make sure they conducted themselves right. So far, there's really been no major case that these cameras have, and with any luck at all, there never will be a major case that these cameras are going to play a key role in.
Sure.
But we have deployed them. We're one of the first around here to deploy them. Lieutenant Eric Zimmer is managing this particular program, and we're very pleased with the outcome so far.
Okay. And it's quite simple for the cop, too, himself, right? I mean, this is not a highly technical thing where he has to be very versed in the technology. It's strap it on and turn it on, right?
That's pretty well it. It's a very simple process, and if he has an incident that he needs to connect his video to the case itself, he's able to go in, place his recorder in a computer, and attach it to the report. We can then send those kinds of things down to the prosecutor's office if they need it. It's available for viewing in court if needed. It's a very useful tool.
As chief of police, any trends you see going on in our community or in our region? Obviously, when the economy was bad, crime tends to tick up. The economy is supposedly improving. Do we see any trends upward, downward, sideways when it comes to crime?
Really the only trend that just makes me lose sleep sometimes is these phone scams, the IRS scams. What was the latest one? I believe the latest one was an FBI scam that I heard about yesterday. But it's been, the water department scams. They're all over the place. They target seniors. You get a phone call that says, hey, you owe us $5,000. You need to go to the store and buy whatever those things are, green dot card right now to pay us, or you'll be arrested. I've received one of those calls myself. The funny thing is my answering machine got it and cut off part of it. So all I got, my message was, grand jury, you will appear in front of a grand jury on such and such a date. Well, I'm in police work, I'm in municipal management, oh Lord. Then they called back a few hours later and I got the whole message, and I felt a lot better about that. But the IRS does not do business this way.
Well, I was going to say almost no one will use the phone for anything that official. Isn't that a pretty safe statement?
It's a pretty safe statement. It's funny because I was thinking last night, and I'm not sure how we're going to address this. We have a number of warrants, active warrants right now in Garden City for people who have ignored ordinance violation tickets.
Okay.
We'd like to get those people in court. What we considered doing, what our plan was, until I started putting these two things together, our plan was to try and call these people on the phone and tell them, you need to show up in court, you've got an open warrant for you. Well, that's pretty well the same thing the scammers are saying, so I'm not sure that's how we want to do it. We might go with a letter or something. I don't, certainly I'm not sending out a SWAT team to round up somebody who
for grass violations.
Who wasn't able to mow their lawn. That's not our plan at all. But yeah, my original plan of just making phone calls, I think I'm going to have to put that aside. But
okay.
This concerns me because they're targeting seniors. We have had some seniors in the area who have lost significant amounts of money. And it's just, it will not happen. And another scam is somehow they find out the name of a grandchild. They call up and they say, Jimmy's in jail or Jimmy's in the hospital.
Well, that's a Facebook problem, isn't it? I mean, people will troll on Facebook, find the names of relatives, and then try to use that to manipulate people.
It certainly is today's source, yes.
Sure.
Back in the old days, you'd have to actually put a little work into figuring out what Ida's grandson's name was. You'd have to fish through the garbage at birthday card time or something along those lines. Now, you're right. There's so much personal information out there on Facebook. Hey, have a great time while you're down there in Florida on vacation for 3
Well,
weeks.
there's a great example too. People just put their life all over the internet. Hey, I'm going to be in Florida for 3 weeks, and you just told people your house is unwatched and empty.
Yeah, if you feel compelled to put your Florida vacation on Facebook, wait until you come back. Hey, we had a great time while I was gone.
Yeah.
But I certainly wouldn't show a picture of yourself and then your whole family swimming with the dolphins, and that signifies that nobody's at your house. Facebook and other social media, probably the most challenging change in my career in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
We have officers who have to constantly look around on social media because we have people reporting crimes, not to the police, but to one another. People reporting hazards in the city, not to the police, but to one another. I don't understand this. I don't know why if you heard noises outside your window at 3 a.m, instead of posting it, you wouldn't pick up a phone and call the police department, but
Right.
it happens.
Right. And if you're so electronically inclined that you don't want to pick up the phone, you can still go to the city's website, and there are ways to actually report non-violent, non-urgent police events. If you don't think it's worthy of coming in and making a police report, you can at least report it to the city online.
That's correct. And a new service, I'm not exactly sure when it will be put in, where it's sometime around the first part of April, is text to 911, which is another pretty neat advancement electronically. So I'm looking forward to that. That may allow a few more people who may not be inclined to pick up a phone, but they will be able to text.
But also that would help somebody who's in an emergency situation where maybe they can't speak,
Yes.
either can't talk or don't want someone to hear them talking. They'll be able to text 911 and report something going on.
Yep, we're looking forward to that development. It's been in the works. There were a few bugs that popped up that had to be ironed out, but it's looking like April now.
Okay, very good. We done now, boss?
It's your interview.
But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and some pretty good information. And again, we talk about website and everything like that. By the way, we'll be blowing up the city's website here in the very near future and starting over with that, and that'll please a lot of people, at least at City Hall and in the rest of the community. So we'll be looking at taking advantage of a lot of those things that are available through social media and through these things that we just talked bad about, and using those to our advantage to get information out to the community and to and try to make people's lives a little bit easier.
And I'll take this moment to pat you on the back because you've put quite a bit of work into this new website. The need for it came up somewhat unexpectedly.
Although we knew we needed to replace it anyways, it became more urgent. When the company hosting it went out of business, that kind of pushes you along.
The timetable changed dramatically. But you've done a great job, and your crew has done a great job picking up the slack on other things while you were busy devoting yourself to this. And so I'm very excited about what we're going to see. We certainly were overdue for
Yes, sir.
Some website improvements, and
sir.
we just got a little nudge.
That's how it usually works around here.
That's how.
All right, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, that wraps up Omni Edition Garden City for this week. Thanks very much for watching, and good night, everybody.